Hello and welcome to the Sonic Cinema podcast. My name is Brian Scuttle and thank you for joining me at www.sonic-cinema.com. Today we're going to be continuing our run through the 1999 movie year with a horror action entry from later in the year directed by Peter Hyams. It's called End of Days with Arnold Schwarzenegger. And to talk about it, I'm pleased to be joined by the the I don't know what
Editor in chief.
editor in chief. I Yeah, I don't know why I didn't think of that. The editor in chief of Death Ensemble, the Death Ensemble website, who's been on the podcast before when we've talked about horror movies, and he's going to be joining me on a couple of these. And please welcome to the show, Phil Fasso. Thank you very much for joining me again.
Oh, Brian, it's my pleasure, and it was not my pleasure to watch End of Days again. Believe me.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're the one who suggested these movies. To
So
be perfectly fair,
let me say that there were a number of great movies to come out in 1999.
yes.
The two we are talking about are not two of them.
Well, and the first one we're talking about is one that I actually did not see in 1999, even though I was curious about it. Peter Hyams' End of Days, which is basically it's one of these movies that's sort of played off of uh, millennium paranoia and stuff like that about the end of the world and all that stuff. And really,
So let me go ahead. I'm
no,
sorry.
go ahead.
No, I was going to say. So let me talk about two things real quick. Number one, this is the last movie I went to see with my brother.
Okay.
And that was 20 years ago.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I just remember I was at his house because I wasn't living at home at the time.
Mhm.
I had already moved out. And my brother, for some reason, said, "You want to go to the movies?" And there was a new theater in Ronkonkoma, a new Regal Cinemas. So I'm like, "Yeah, sure." So we went to see End of Days. And that is historic because that is the last movie I saw with my brother, and that was a full 2 decades ago. The other thing that I want to talk about to set this up, to set the frame for your audience who might not have been around or don't know about this. So the whole thing with 1999 turning into 2000, as I'm sure you remember, was the Y2K craze.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
So just a little history on that. So Y2J was this thing where basically all the computers, because we become so computerized by then, were apparently set where their internal calendars did not go past 1999.
Right.
So the idea was that, hey, once January 1st rolls around on 2000, it's going to be total chaos. All the streetlights are going to be off. There's going to be no electricity. People screaming in the streets. Dogs and cats living together. All those sorts of things. There's going to be no semblance of structure, or the whole social structure is going to collapse
Yeah.
because our computers are all going to die.
Yep.
Now, as we know, none of that happened.
No.
Okay? The other thing is that, of course, now we're talking about a new millennium. Well,
Mhm.
the millennium is technically 2001 that it changes, but
Right.
everyone thinks it's the new millennium in 2000, right? Okay, so all of a sudden, I'm waiting for, as 1999 rolls in, me being a movie fan and a horror fan, and, I was semi-religious at that point, I guess, I'm expecting all sorts of movies like this. Not quite the disaster this is,
Right.
but movies that are in the same line of, hey, the world's going to fall apart, terror, chaos, religious overtones, all those sorts of things. And as far as I remember, this was the only one to come out that was in that vein.
Yeah.
At least that I remember
Yeah.
of.
No, and that's absolutely right, and it's funny because arguably, if I had to go as far as sort of like end of times horror, I think the best genre entry that year was the Hush episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which was brilliant, and basically it basically the voices of the denizens of Sunnydale in that episode had been taken by monsters, and so you basically had like 29 minutes of no dialogue whatsoever, and so it was silent storytelling. But they played up to a certain extent when you go through like the town in that episode. There's like all of these end of times, like paranoid, you know, people reading Bible passages and all of that, or like
Sure.
sign language through Bible passages and stuff like that. So, but I will have to say, like, it's funny that the probably the best example of doing like end of millennium or end of times filmmaking was probably Catherine Bigelow's Strange Days a few years earlier, which
Probably, yeah.
was another one that played up the 1999 going over to 2000, but that movie dealt with a little bit more real world implications than just genre nonsense.
Sure.
But it's still it's yeah there's a lot of things that this movie has. There are a lot of ideas that are in this movie that like really don't connect and at all, and I
No.
think that's one of the things that's I guess I should say interesting about it, but I mean I don't want to give the movie more credit than it deserves because it's really kind of a boring movie.
But if you wanted to see a movie in which Arnold Schwarzenegger gets crucified, this is the movie for you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Basically,
So the thing with the Y2J stuff is just that it was this whole idea of turning the clock to 2000, right? So we're in a whole different world when we change to 2000, right? It's progress. It's a big marker on the calendar, millennial, right?
yeah,
So this whole idea that the world's going to change, everyone's tied into their computers. All this stuff's going to go on, and there's going to be some really, it was kind of like you had the sense of wonder where everyone was like, "Wow, this is going to be a whole new, different experience," right?
yeah,
And then you had the whole fear thing with the the Y2J in that,
yeah.
and the Y2K in that rather, and those things could have culminated in a whole slew of movies,
Mm-hmm.
especially in genre stuff,
Oh yeah.
And this, unfortunately, is the only movie really to capitalize on it in 1999. It's shocking. It's astounding.
Yeah.
It's just really surprising that there weren't a whole slew of these things coming out.
Oh, absolutely. And it breaks my heart when I was reading on the trivia on IMDb as I was watching the movie that apparently Universal had approached Guillermo del Toro to do this at one point, but I think he was in the middle of doing something else, so he wasn't able to do it. And it's like, oh my God, we missed out on something that could have been actually really good. And
I mean, imagine how interesting it would have been, because what an interesting take that Del Toro has on everything.
yeah,
To get him to do a movie like this,
yeah,
Imagine how someone with that kind of creative force. Now, Peter Hyams 2 years earlier had made The Relic, which
Mhm.
I think is for me, it's the perfect 1990s monster flick.
Mhm.
It throws you back to the 1950s with a monster running around and eating people and killing everyone. And there's some great stimulants and special effects there. So he's coming off that. He's coming off what I found. That's another one, but I actually have to see that one in the movies as well. So he's coming off a really top-notch genre piece that's a lot of fun. You have some great stuff in that, great special effects, some good character actors. And then he gets here, and I'm like, what the hell am I watching?
Well, and that's the thing. Like, yeah, you mentioned Hyams, and yeah, it's been 20 plus years since I've seen The Relic, but yeah, I really liked The Relic when I saw it. And he's also the director of 2010, which is not the Kubrick film, but is a damn good sequel to a masterpiece. And the fact that he was able to do that well with that material, it's like the point is he's a better filmmaker than what we see here. And I have a feeling part of the problem, a huge part of this problem with this movie, it lands on the screenplay, but it also lands on the fact that this is Arnold Schwarzenegger. And this was basically, he had been away from movies for a couple of years at this point, even though he hadn't quite gone into politics. And he was sort of looking at this as sort of a comeback movie. Because I think this might have been the first one he had done since Batman Robin.
It is, yeah.
And so when you look at this, when you listen to the dialogue and the scenes that he has, it's very much an Arnold Schwarzenegger action movie. But
that's the problem.
Yeah.
That's the problem, because Jericho Kane, his character, is supposed to be this deeply affected guy, right?
Yeah.
His wife and child died, right? He's at a moral, crossroads. Mm-hmm. He's basically given up on life. He's walking dead at this point, right?
Yeah.
He has nothing to live for. And of course, you get the most cliche way of showing that. But he wakes up in his apartment. His apartment's filthy. It's a disaster. And he throws a slice of pizza with some liquid into a blender. Like, okay, so I don't need to hit me over the head with this, But that's how we're introduced to him. And of course, it's Schwarzenegger with some, scruffy facial hair.
Yeah.
So he's given up. But the problem is, if you put somebody talented, and I'm not saying Arnold Schwarzenegger isn't talented, but he does. But if you put a real actor in that role, let's say Hugh Dancy, for argument's sake, because Hugh Dancy was great in Hannibal. It's greatly affected Will Graham. Yeah. If you put him in that role instead, you have a real flick on your hands. Mm-hmm. So the whole thing is, you've tied this religious and moral morass around Schwarzenegger, who's clearly not cut out for it at all.
No.
He's not.
No. I mean, the thing is, it's so, and that goes to the screenplay in general, and the screenplay is by Andrew Marlowe, who before this had written Air Force One. So Air Force One is a pretty good genre film, and then he had also created the TV show Castle, the Nathan Fillion vehicle. So his thing is more quote unquote real world pulp, not gotcha. Supernatural thrillers, and this is. You can't help but think of a little bit of Rosemary's Baby, but also I couldn't help but think of Da Vinci Code as well. With this whole religious conspiratorial storyline that really doesn't get fully explained until the 1 hour mark by Rod Steiger. And it's like this movie is just such, and up until then it's an ugly movie to look at. It seems like it's an ugly movie to look at, which is weird because Hyams is a good director. He's a good cinematographer.
He does his own cinematography. Yeah. I'm shocked that this is as ugly as it is.
Yeah. And so this movie's, it's just such a mess. And it's like,
here's the thing, okay? And again, I'm a big fan of that whole religious horror thing that was going on in the late 60s, early 70s. I told you on one of your other podcasts, Gnomon is by far my favorite horror movie. Mm-hmm. But with Rosemary's Baby, I'm not a big fan of The Exorcist, but with those movies, it doesn't seem like the religion was just thrown in for the gags, right. Here, like I really believe that Gregory Peck is trying to convince himself that he's not the stepfather to Satan's son,
Yeah.
And again, like Rosemary, she's trying to convince herself that this cult, nothing's going wrong in the entire world. But I'm buying into that. There is a cult out there who is living in this apartment building who has gotten Satan to seduce this woman to bring his son to earth. It is the most ridiculous thing in the world. If you told somebody in the street that, nobody would ever, that's the stupidest thing in the world. But watching that movie, I've bought in. It's convinced me through the performances, through the writing, through that. I mean, Max von Sydow is a great actor. He is totally convincing as Father Merrin.
Yeah.
There's no way that he's not this haunted priest in that movie. You buy in. Schwarzenegger running around with Gabriel Byrne as quote unquote the man. And let's talk a little bit about Gabriel Byrne.
Yeah.
Okay. First off, a very, very fine character actor.
Absolutely.
Not in this movie.
No.
Okay? So the first thing we see with once he becomes the devil, right? Because there's this whole thing where he's this. First off, there's this whole subplot at the beginning where he's this rich guy that Arnold Schwarzenegger is supposed to protect because Arnold Schwarzenegger is a previous cop, right?
Yeah.
So you're setting up a banker. I guess you're trying to say at that point that money is the root of all evil, so the devil's going to take over a banker, right?
Right.
Instead of taking over an innocent girl who's strapped into a bed and going to puke pea soup, you're going to make him into a banker. Okay, fine. He becomes this devil because Satan swoops into him, right? And what is the first thing? So this is the millennial badass. This is the evil of all evil, right?
Yeah.
So what is the first thing we see him do? Some skate kid pisses him off, and he basically makes the kid roll out in front of a truck. So that's what the devil. So that's how the devil is going to use his power. This should be the most powerful force of evil on the face of the earth, and he just killed a skate kid for pissing him off. Right there, I'm like, what is going on here? Don't get me wrong. Gabriel Byrne does the best he can with what is, let's be honest, a shitty role.
Yeah.
In this movie.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the thing is, I will say, like, there's a scene later on in the movie with Arnold and Gabriel Byrne where Gabriel Byrne is, basically recalling to Arnold, like, the scene where his family died. It's got some interesting dialogue in it, and it's like, it's one of the few scenes where it's like, Gabriel Byrne feels somewhat invested in this movie. Like, otherwise, he's just completely over the top and ridiculous in the movie. And yeah, he's a fantastic character actor. I love him in Miller's Crossing. I thought he was fantastic in Hereditary this past year.
And look, in a sea of great actors in The Usual Suspects, which I also believe came out in '99, right? Wasn't it '99 as well?
95.
Okay,
it came
95.
Out a few years before, but
right.
Yeah.
So the thing is that in a sea of great character actors, he's the one that pops in that movie.
Yeah.
Because Gabriel Byrne is just a talented guy.
Mm-hmm.
He looks bored in this movie. He looks like they told him, all right, just overplay it. And he looks like, all right, so when's my paycheck coming?
Yeah, exactly.
So you have Schwarzenegger, who's not convincing as this guy stuck in the middle of a moral morass, who's falling apart because his wife died, and he's at this spiritual crossroad where he's given up, but he wants to redeem himself. And then he's terribly miscast. And then you have Gabriel Byrne, who's totally misused in this movie.
Yeah.
So again, you have two actors, and these are your two leads. And neither one belongs in this movie at all, which is a shame.
It
then
really
you have
is.
Kevin Pollak as Schwarzenegger's wisecracking buddy.
God, I can't believe I forgot Kevin Pollak was in this movie. Yes, that's another Usual Suspects alumni.
Yes, it is.
And
absolutely
another fantastic character actor.
I remember him on the show.
Done. But
I don't remember what the TV show was. He was on this. He was like a secondary player on this comedy show that was very briefly on in the '80s. And that was when I first discovered him. And he's hilarious.
Yeah.
But he's not hilarious in this movie at all.
No.
He's supposed to be the wisecracking sidekick guy. It's just like none of it works.
Yeah.
None of it.
No, and it's because of the fact that this movie, I can't say. To a certain extent, I don't want to say it has an issue with tone, but it kind of has an issue with tone. And I think that comes from the fact that on the one hand, you're trying to make this religious end of the world movie. On the other hand, you're trying to make it Arnold Schwarzenegger action movie. And
where shit blows up
just don't work.
No, not at all.
And yeah,
there is a way where you could have done this. Even if you want to throw some action scenes in there is a way where you could have done this if you had somebody who was a more capable actor.
Yeah.
And let's face it, Schwarzenegger in the 80s, hey, I'm just like most guys. Predator is one of my favorite films. Yeah. It's a great film. Commando, all his flicks that he did in the 80s, Conan. Conan was the first flick I ever saw in a drive-in theater. My mom took us when we were kids. So, Schwarzenegger was great at that stuff. But he's so limited in his actual acting ability when he's not pumping his muscles and throwing swords and monsters around, that you have what is a pretty weighty role considering he's supposed to be this tortured guy and it's dialogue heavy. And it's just, no, why?
Yeah.
So apparently, from what I read, because I did some research also, I read that Jim Cameron was somehow involved in this film.
Oh, yeah,
and he's the one who told Hyams, hey, you got to direct this, and Schwarzenegger is going to star in it.
Yeah.
Because apparently Jim Cameron, apparently, because like you said, Schwarzenegger wasn't in movies for a couple of years, and that was apparently because of his heart condition. He had heart surgery at one point, and he was basically uninsurable. He couldn't get insurance, so they couldn't film anything.
Mm-hmm.
They wouldn't, especially because he does a lot of his own stunts. So James Cameron came to Hyams and said, you got to direct this. And I think that because you threw Hyams into a movie that wasn't his originally, and you're taking a script that's kind of a disaster, and he's stuck with Schwarzenegger, who's got limited talent, I just think that this thing was set up to fail before it even started.
Yeah. Yeah,
and then you get into some of the minutia of it. So I'm looking at there's a scene at the beginning, right, where they find this child. It's the whole sky and the stars ripping the sky and all that. It's she's got to be born. It's her. So the nurse smuggles the baby out and brings it to some secret basement somewhere, right?
Yeah.
And there's the scene where she puts the baby down, and you look at it as crying, and it's a baby, right?
Yeah.
She grabs a snake and keeps cutting back between the baby's face and the long shot. And in the long shot, it's a fucking doll. Not only is it a doll, it's an obvious doll. It's like Peter, 2 years ago you had Stan Winston creating a cathoga for you running around the fucking museum. And now we're looking at a baby doll, and oh my god, it's so bad, so obvious at this thing. And some of the other special effects, like the bum who's got the sewn shut eyes. I mean, it's just some of it is just so bad for a movie that really needed effects. They didn't splurge on the effects in this thing at all. It was awful.
Well, and that's one of the baffling things about these big studio movies. Like, this was a Universal production.
Yeah, it was.
This wasn't an indie film. This was a Universal movie, and it's like they weren't hard up on money at the time. Probably it's like, so how do you not make sure that this movie, how do you not treat this movie? Because I don't remember what else they would have had around the holidays this year that would have sort of taken precedent about it. It's like, and the thing is, it's like the movie did okay. It's not like it didn't completely flop. I mean, it also wasn't a huge hit either. But it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, why are you, if this is supposed to be a big deal for Arnold, why are you not trying to make this movie as top-notch quality as possible?
Absolutely. I think that the studio, this, you have to figure when a director makes a movie, he's got a cut that he's got to show the execs, right?
Yeah.
That means a bunch of execs were sitting around in a movie room watching the film project onto a wall or screen and saw that baby doll on that table and said to themselves, we can let that scene stay in. Sure, why not?
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah. And the thing is, it's like, it's got a decent hook. It's got an interesting premise. The problem is, part of the problem is the storytelling and the filmmaking, because this movie moves from scene to scene pretty quickly, but it doesn't really explain anything. It really is not until Rod Steiger as a priest comes in to basically explain the entire story. Like, we pick up sort of what the basic idea is, but it's like, oh, we're not going to worry about exposition. We're just going to go from scene to scene to scene. And this movie was such a weird movie to watch. couldn't get over the fact at how wrong Schwarzenegger was for it. I couldn't get over the fact that it was just so predictable in the way it staged things, the way it executed things, in that it was absurd from minute one, and it's just like how it's one of those things where it's like, how do you have all of these talented people? And yeah, Schwarzenegger, he's not a great actor, but if you play to his strengths as an actor, he can be really good. And the movies
Sure.
you mentioned earlier, Predator, Terminator, Conan, all of those are great examples of that.
Absolutely.
This is not a good example of that. And it's because of you're asking him to sort of go outside of his wheelhouse as an actor and what his strengths are. And it's like, if you put an actor like two people I thought of who would have been really good in this role, Denzel Washington probably would have been really good in this role, or Harrison Ford. Like,
Yeah.
if you have somebody like that, like, I think you could really make this movie work. But the problem is, it also is confused about what type of movie it wants to be too.
Oh, it absolutely. Just look at the first two major sequences, right?
Yeah,
The first sequence is the star, the comets have aligned. We have this kid that's going to be born, that's going to be the devil's wife one day, and then Satan's going to go back to Earth. Then the next scene is this giant action scene with Schwarzenegger jumping across buildings and gunfire and explosions. Those two scenes they don't go together. They smash into each other.
yeah, and that
Two totally different films.
yeah, and that chase scene at the start that you just explained was bonkers. Like, I couldn't get over what I was watching. It's like, really, and the score by John Debney, who's a pretty good composer. He's done some good work. He sounds like he's aping the Terminator in that sequence, in that scene, and in the movie in general. It's like, yeah,
absolutely.
Again, you don't know what type of movie you're supposed to be making.
No, and that's the problem.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's how they could have made this successful one way or the other. So if you want to make something in the vein of Rosemary's Baby and The Omen, and you want to go with the devil is going to come to Earth, and that's a legitimately, people have been scared of that for thousands of years,
Yeah.
You have the epic poems written about the devil coming to Earth, I have a whole book somewhere. I don't remember where it is, but it's like 25 short stories about the Faustian tale. Because we're so obsessed with the evil, and the evil as this just eternal thing that's going to come, and it's creeping into our lives every day, because we never know when dad's going to get cancer, or you're going to break up, your relationship's going to break up. We never know when that stuff's coming.
Right.
The evils in life are always there, just like the hand of doom waiting over our head, right? So that's one thing, okay? And I totally get that. So if you want to go that route and make that type of movie, then I can justify the whole religious mumbo jumbo. I can justify a priest being hung from the ceiling. Because just a few years, I think it was just a few years before this, you have The Exorcist 3 coming out, directed by William Friedkin, the guy who wrote it. I don't remember his name.
Blatty.
There you go, yeah. Paul Blatty. Yeah, that is a scary movie where the religion plays perfectly into the story. Yeah. So if you wanted to do that, there's precedent that works. Obviously, there's plenty of it where you can say to yourself, "All right, I can see how this would work." Or if you just want to make a badass action flick and you want to see the devil, on Earth, and you want to see Arnold Schwarzenegger, sword dueling the guy, machine gun fights. Break out a Browning 50 caliber and blowing the devil away and this and that. That I could see. You could go that route too, and that would work. That would work to Schwarzenegger's strengths. Yeah. You could have made an action flick out of this. You could have cut out all the religious mumbo jumbo. You could have made an action flick out of this, and that also could have worked. Yeah. What they decided to do instead was try to make this hybrid thing between the two, which is neither fish nor fowl, and it fails at both. It's not a very good action flick, and it's not scary. So it's not a horror flick either. Had they gone either one of those routes instead of trying to say, hey, let's stick them together, maybe they would have had something. Problem being that they decided, hey, you know what? We want to make this, it's a religious and theist thing with the Bible and all that. 2000, the year 2000's coming up, and they wanted to do the whole, hey, well, Schwarzenegger's in this, so let's blow shit up.
Yeah.
Now, because they went both routes instead of choosing one or the other, it fails on all cylinders. There's no way to save this flick as it is.
No, absolutely.
And that's unfortunate.
That's absolutely right. And the thing is, it's like and I would say, I mean, you're absolutely right. And the thing is, it's like if you're going to go the religious route, you're going to go the religious paranoia route. It's like you're going to have to do something smaller. You're obviously going to have to recast the main character and do something smaller. Now, it doesn't mean you can't make it, effective as far as the visual effects and stuff like that.
Sure.
Yeah, you're maybe not going to go as big as you normally would, but at the same time, you don't have to. You should be able to do something effective in that way, and it's like that's where the idea of Del Toro doing this really will have been great, because it's like he's done Devil's Backbone, he's done Pan's Labyrinth, and stuff like that, where it's like, or he's done something like Crimson Peak, which is not great, but at least you see his personal vision there, and you can see sort of like the way he can go big and the way he can go small, and the way he can be effective in both routes. Or, if you want to do something more pulpy, more thriller based, the Da Vinci Code was a few years away. And it's like, that setup, you can do that and make it entertaining, but it's like, at least you have to pick a way to do it. And I think the thing is, it's like, it's either not ambitious enough or it's too ambitious. And it's hard to sort of figure out which one it is, because, again, like we've said, this doesn't know what it wants to be.
Exactly. I would argue exactly what you said, that it doesn't know what it is. So how am I as a viewer supposed to know what it is?
Yeah.
Yeah, and you're throwing in all this. If you're trying to get me to buy into the religious aspect, you're not doing a very good job of selling it. So now, on that note, can I bring up my favorite scene here?
Sure.
So they go to investigate this. I guess he's a priest. He's in a hospital. I think he's a priest. So they go to talk to him about what's going on, because they're trying to figure out this mystery.
Yeah.
So they walk into the room, and the guy is crucified to the ceiling. All right, he's strung up.
Right.
I don't remember if it's scalpels or whatever. Something's sticking him to, but he's got his arms out, his legs crossed. He's definitely been crucified.
Yeah.
So they're looking at him, and he's got all these carvings on his chest. Right? So they start to read the carvings, and Schwarzenegger says, "Christ in New York," which, of course, in Schwarzenegger's accent comes out, "Christ in New York." So he's looking at this like this is some great mystery and trying to figure something out. Christ in New York, Christ in New York, Christine, New York. And then they run to a phone book to find Christine, New York, in New York City, mind you. How is that not supposed to play as comedy?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm watching a poor priest who's been crucified to a ceiling, tortured. He's got all these carvings in himself, and I'm laughing at this scene.
Yeah.
That's not the attack. That's not the intended effect, I'm sure, but that is certainly the effect that it had on me. Yeah. So every time I see the poster for this or comes up online, all I think is Christ in New York, and I can't help but laugh. Like, again, if you want, there's so many better ways to do this, Brian, and it just didn't go with any of them.
Yeah.
Like, there's that whole thing. So Gabriel Byrne is supposed to be a badass, obviously, because he killed the kid on a skateboard. So then there's this weird scene, I can't even describe it, where he ends up in bed with two women, but they kind of blend into each other and into him. So I'm like, what is going on here?
That was, and the thing is, it's like, was that Gabriel Byrne or was that Udo Kier's character?
Oh, was that Udo Kier?
I think it was Udo's Kier character, because I made because I made a point of writing it down in my notes. It's like, what the fuck was that turn from meeting Udo Kier's family to a weird ass threesome? And it's like, that is such a bizarre switch. It's another example of this movie just going from. It seems like sometimes the movie goes from scene to scene just completely randomly, and it's the weirdest damn thing ever.
Because you're trying to sell Gabriel Byrne as the baddest villain in the history of bad villains, right? Nobody, Darth Vader does not top Satan, right? Satan's the biggest badass on the planet. You can't beat this guy. You know, he falls out. He's a fallen angel and it creates the opposite of heaven. You can't beat this guy. And the way they try to show him, like the thing with the skateboard and then that thing with the women blending into each other. Oh, how titillating. You had a threesome. Look, the devil's a badass. Oh, whatever. It doesn't even, like, if you look at Seven, okay, which came out, I think, in 1994, right? About 5 years before this, I think?
Yeah.
95. So 4 years before this.
Yeah.
Seven is a brilliant movie. Yep. Seven knows how to play religion. Seven knows how to creep me out. Because I can't watch that movie. It's one of my favorite films. I love Morgan Freeman, Brad Pitt is great in it, Kevin Spacey, my favorite Spacey role by far. I think it's the best he's ever done. And you know what? The thing is that I'm watching that, and that is how you make religion creepy. That is how you do it. You don't have a guy throw a kid on a skateboard in front of a bus. That's not how you do it, you know?
Yeah.
So, you know, again, it's just I can't get off this thing that there's just so many better ways to do this, and they didn't choose any of them. You know, and it's just, like you said, it's just from scene to scene. Sometimes it's like I think I'm watching a scene from a different movie. Mm-hmm. Like, why is this here?
Yeah.
So it's like, I swear to God, it's like they said, well, you know what? Technically, Schwarzenegger, when he played Conan in 82, was crucified to that tree. And this is a religious flick. So maybe if we crucify him in an alley, people will think of Conan and have good thoughts about this movie. It's like, where is this coming from? So you're going to use religious iconography like that. You need to make religious iconography work, and this movie certainly does not.
Yeah,
and even in the
you have to take it. You also have to take it. I think you also have to, if you're going to go that route of taking these type of religious ideas seriously, you have to take them seriously. And it's like, it's not to say you can't do that in the context of a big budget action movie, but this shows that is a little bit harder when you're trying to do something that's big and over the top. And it's like, it's clear that it doesn't take that type of idea seriously because of all of the things that you're talking about.
It's like they decided to take every religious stereotype in bad horror movies and throw them into this one.
Yeah.
You know? And you get this muddled script, and you get poor acting, and you get, you know, Hyams, he's not a brilliant director, but he's more than capable, and he's more than better than this, like you said earlier, you know? So if we want to talk religious iconography, should we talk about the end?
Sure, we can.
This movie's idea, the end of days, this movie's idea of showing us that Schwarzenegger's gone through his character arc, you know, he's grown, he's realized that there is some kind of redemption, and how to have them do that but to martyr himself.
Yeah.
So Schwarzenegger, I believe this is the first time since Terminator that a Schwarzenegger character has died on film.
Yeah.
So what happened was, you know, he's got to save Christine York, and not only save Christine York, but save the world from the devil, and he's going to impale himself on a sword.
Yeah.
Which, you know, again, the religious iconography is all over that. He's going to martyr himself. So Schwarzenegger died so that we could live.
Right.
That's the message I get at the end of this film.
Yeah.
Schwarzenegger has become basically a Christ figure in this movie at the end.
Yeah.
He has died to save us all. What do you think about that, Brian? Tell me what you think about that.
I will admit I like the idea of I did. If you're going to go that way, narratively speaking, I like the idea of him sacrificing himself at the end. You're absolutely right. It's completely martyr. It's complete martyr, self-sacrifice type choice. I like the choice in if you're going to do that in the screenplay. Again, I like that choice. Does it work in the execution though? No. But then again, not really much of anything in this movie does work in the execution. And again, it boils down to the choice of Schwarzenegger himself. It's like he doesn't have that weight as an actor. And it's like, you're talking about it. It's like, I couldn't help but think, it's like, well, did this script ever cross Mel Gibson's eyes? It's like, that would be a perfect role for him because God knows he hasn't played the martyr in more than a few of his movies. But yeah.
So you get the passion of the Schwarzenegger, basically.
Basically, yeah.
At the end of this film. Well, look, going back and revisiting this was painful, but I do have to admit I got a bunch of laughs out of it.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, you have two different concepts here. You have what could have been a really good action movie, or what could have been a more profound look at religion and the changing times and changing calendar and all that. Like I said, the action scenes are not very good. They don't really get my heart pumping. And as a guy who loves horror, the horror just doesn't scare me. It doesn't creep me out. It doesn't do anything for me. And that's kind of sad. And I think that Schwarzenegger, probably had the right intent here. He probably figured, hey, this has a little meat on its bones more than, say, Commando did, that type thing. And again, I have to give him credit on one thing. Maybe I'm blaming him instead of the director on this, but it's certainly better than watching him, sing the Snow Miser song in a frost suit in Batman.
Yeah,
in Batman and Robin.
Yeah, that's but then again, there's not much that's more painful than watching Batman and Robin. There are a lot of Lord knows there have been a lot of really bad, like when comic book movies go bad, they go really bad, and that one is certainly one of the worst. But I do have to say, it's like I have to give this props for, I guess, to a certain extent, for having a little bit of ambition. I just wish it knew what it wanted to do a little bit more, a lot more. In fact,
well, I'm always willing to applaud something for trying something different.
Yeah,
I always am.
Yeah,
Rob Zombie wants to remake Halloween. He did something different with the first half of it. I applaud that.
Yeah,
you want to do something different in art. I always applaud that. That does not mean I applaud the product that comes from it.
Exactly.
Because the execution, often is awful, and that's exactly what you have here. You have a case of a movie what could have been really something challenging, or could have been just a balls out action movie, and it's neither one of those things, and unfortunately it's just not good.
Yeah, no. I will say before we wrap up our talk of End of Days, the main reason I was curious about this movie in 1999, and makes it a little bit more surprising that I didn't see it at the time, was because this movie has a Guns N' Roses song at the end of it. It was the first Guns N' Roses song to come out in a few years, and was the first one after the band broke up. And it's called "Oh My God." It plays during the end credits, and I had heard it several years before, but it'd been a while since I'd heard it when I watched this movie. And it's like, yeah, that's not a good song. That wasn't a very good song.
I'm sorry to cut you off, but it also has a song by Rob Zombie. Speaking of Rob Zombie, hold on one second, if I can check this out real quick. Called Super Beast. Yeah, that's it. That's right. And there's a video. See, I don't know why. I think this was like in the $2 used bin, previously viewed at Blockbuster one time, because I do own this on DVD. I am embarrassed to admit.
Yeah.
And maybe I did that out of some sense of nostalgia, this being the last movie I ever saw with my brother, or maybe I just wanted to watch a shitty flick for $2. But yeah, I remember that Super Beast they have a video for Super Beast as one of the extras on the disc.
Mm-hmm.
Oddly enough. So you have Guns N' Roses and you have Rob Zombie and some really weird soundtrack choices for what is a religious horror action flick.
Yeah. And but yeah, that was the reason I was curious at the time in 1999, because I was a big Guns N' Roses fan at the time. And it's like, oh, hey, a new Guns N' Roses song. I never saw the movie, but I did eventually listen to the song. It's like, it's okay. And then when I listened to it again after watching the movie, it's like, yeah, this wasn't that good of a song. So yeah, it kind of fits the movie there. But
yeah, Brian, I don't think anything good is attached to this movie at all.
I mean, don't think we talked. They're good actors. They're good filmmakers. They're just not the service of a good product.
Nope.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for joining me on this discussion of End of Days, Phil. I'm glad that I'm glad that even though it is a lousy film, I am glad that I finally got a chance to see it. So I appreciate you for suggesting that we watch that, if for no reason alone other than the fact that I finally did get around to watching it.
Well, I'm very sorry that I made you watch a really shitty movie for this discussion.
Well, I mean, it happens.
But hey, you know what? We could have done the Blair Witch thing if it weren't for my former friend Dave. And everyone's talked about Blair Witch. How many people do you know that are going out of their way to talk about End of Days?
Exactly. You know what? I'm going to be talking about so many great films through 1999. You know what? There are some not so great films that they're worth discussing. And I mean, they're. Yeah, and I mean, Blair Witch. I mean, I'm gonna be talking about Blair Witch with other people. It's like I'm not too worried about that. But it's like End of Days. It's like when you mention this one and the other one that we're gonna do, it's like, okay, I could get behind this because now I can finally, see some of these movies, and then it'll be an interesting discussion to watch these for the first time and sort of like talk about those thoughts. But thank you very much for joining me on this.
Oh, Brian, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. I'm always happy to come on your podcast. And hopefully one day we will talk about great movies from 1999 or some other year, but not this time around.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, Brian.
I'd like to thank Phil Fasso for joining me today to discuss End of Days. It was a really fun conversation. We'll be back with another Class of 1999 horror movie to discuss. For now, hit me up on patreon.com/SonicCinema. Any time that you can help, this is completely independent, and I would really like to keep it that way. And I'd like to build this into something that is sustainable. Also, check us out on the YouTube Sonic Cinema podcast page. For now, though, this is Brian Scuttle, and thank you for joining me at www.sonic-cinema.com.